Morning, everyone. My name is Heather Kinsey, and I'm sorry that we're starting just a tad bit late, but I'm joining you from Anchorage, Alaska. And with me is Woodrie Burich. If you're new to our webinars, we're doing them daily on a variety of leadership, business, workforce topics, all revolving around managing disruption due to COVID-19. So Woodrie is joining us today to specifically talk about resilience and leadership. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I turn it over to Woodrie. You could visit our website at thestrivegroup.com for our programming. Just select the COVID-19 resource button. If you have an idea or a suggestion for a topic, or if you have a specific question for future experts, then you can email those to info@thestrivegroup.com. Monday's session is leading in disruptive times, and then the following day we'll have a topic specifically on protecting your mental health. Again, today's topic is resilience, and with me today is Woodrie Burich. If you're joining us live, you can chat directly to me. I'll moderate on Woodrie's behalf. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll just enter in your question. I'll field that question, hop on, interrupt Woodrie, and ask her that question, and then I'll pop back off so she can continue. All right, so without further ado, Woodrie, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Heather. I really appreciate the warm welcome. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for taking some time. So before we get started, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on who I am so you know who you're speaking to, and a little bit about my background. So I come from the technology industry. So I've been in tech for about 20 years, and I have really grown. Originally, I started off in sales, and then after sales and doing some sales executive stuff, I started my own company about 10 years ago, and I focused historically on two things, primarily strategic consulting, and then secondarily, I've also worked on stress management in the workplace, how to provide resilience for ourselves. So I've been speaking to organizations for about 2 years on resilience. And the things that I've really focused on have been primarily around centering ourselves and how to gain reflection for ourselves in those moments. So the thing I'd like to start off with as we go through these slides, I probably won't get to each individual question, but what I will do is talk about them as a whole. So when we look at leading through threats, certainly we're in a very, very difficult time in this current moment. And when we're facing a time like this, we need to step back for a moment and realize that everyone leads. And it doesn't matter our title, doesn't matter what our background is, everyone leads from a variety of realms, whether that comes from leadership within an organization, whether that comes from leadership within the home, whether that comes from leadership within our community. There's many, many ways we lead. So I'd like to start off with that premise when we're thinking about leading through threats. And then what I'd like to talk about is, again, those two centering tools that I was mentioning before. During times like this, having a very, very strong centering tool for ourselves and having a very strong reflection tool, something that gives us some connection to reality, becomes really important. Awareness, introspection, things along those lines to support ourselves in times that are very, very challenging. I was sharing with a colleague of mine recently that I just got back from a conference where I was in a room with about 65 to 70 doctors. I'd signed up for this conference, or it was a workshop actually, about a year ago, and it was with healthcare professionals. I was one of only 5 individuals that was not healthcare oriented. And we met in this conference, in this workshop, to talk about how to be with deep pain and suffering. In the midst of deep pain and suffering, we were working with healthcare and palliative care, end-of-life suffering. And I was interested in attending to it because I also find in the work world, we have a lot of challenges that we have to face. Mental health for our employees, a lot of stressors, daily stressors. And this training, this workshop actually talked about how to connect with ourselves very, very deeply and then meet the moment, no matter what that moment had, right? No matter what challenge that moment brought, the unknown, constantly stepping into the unknown. The people that I was meeting with, constantly stepping into unknown situations. So I find it really interesting in terms of timing that right before COVID really hit hard in the Western world, I was at this conference surrounded by 65, 70 doctors. So some of what I'm going to talk to you today has to do with that. And I'm going to lead us through an exercise in the next slide as well that helps us center a little bit. So hopefully that will be beneficial. So when I think about how do I face threats, and thank you, Heather, going back to that slide. How do I face threats? How do I best support the mental health of my employees? Centering, reflection, something simple that I provide folks and I let folks know is kind of 3 ways of looking at things, right? We want to give our mind sometimes to help alleviate anxiety or to help alleviate the concerns that employees come to us with. We want to give our mind something to do, because sometimes the mind starts to race very quickly, especially in times of stress. So we want to give the mind something to do. We want to give the body something to move, right? The body wants to move. So we want to support our body in a lot of movement during this time. And then the third thing is we want to give that emotional aspect for ourselves. We want to give that something to connect to. So how does this really play out in the work world, right? So we're talking about this specifically in work, right? So how does that play out in the work world? Well, for my mind, if I'm looking at my business and I'm looking at the employees in my business, I'm thinking, okay, what are my next steps? What are my different options? Remember how we were talking about that reflection tool? The reflection tool and being able to reflect at the reality of our situation, I'm going to give my mind something to do by giving it something to chew on, by giving it very concrete, actionable steps of what I need to do to keep my business either afloat or moving through this time. I'm going to give it specific steps, all of these different fabulous things that the Strive group is offering right now, all the different things with the CARES program, the loans, everything along those lines. That's something that the mind can do. Or let's look at a strategic plan for this moment, or dealing with a client issue. That's something for the mind to do. Giving the body something to move in between our days, something that really helps us, especially right now because these blurred lines are happening between our work lives and our home lives. I'm sure you can see my fabulous fingernail paint here. I think this is a really good reflection. Here I am in my work clothes, and I'm very much a mother, and I'm getting ready for the spring weekend, the Easter weekend, and you can see these fabulous colored nails, which I usually wouldn't have during the workday. But this is where we are, right? This is COVID. So finding something in our bodies to move as we blur those lines between work life, home life. Maybe we can take a stretch in between our meetings. Maybe we can go for a run or a walk. We can get outside a little bit more than we did before. If we happen to be in a very busy city, I know this is a global call, right? So other people can dial in. If we're in a global city, we can't get out as much. That's okay. Maybe we can move around. We can join into a class online. Any way that we support ourselves as leaders is going to be really beneficial during this time. And then going back to that emotional piece, how do we support our emotions? We connect. We join in a meeting like this. We connect. We see other people. We see other faces. We pick up a phone, make a phone call to our family members, community members, different colleagues. Really ask in and check in. How are you doing today? How is your family during this time? Those are the kinds of things that we can support, and how to best support ourselves and those around us. When we feed ourselves during these times, we're going to feed those around us. And that's really needed right now. Thank you, Heather. You can go to the next slide. So with that kind of as our premise and our base, let's jump into a little bit of an exercise. I'd like to talk a little bit about meditation and mindfulness. So for those of you who have had experience with meditation and mindfulness, you might recognize some things that are similar with this. I want to be very clear that the exercise I'm about to do is a breathing exercise. It is not a meditation or mindfulness training. It is a very simple breathing exercise. That said, if you enjoy it, my recommendation is to find a really qualified meditation or mindfulness teacher. They can give you the nuances and the subtleties that help with this. Likewise, if you have some background in this, you'll recognize some similarities. Before we dive into the exercise, what I'd like to talk about, though, are some of the benefits that they're finding with meditation and mindfulness. If you give it a Google, right, give it a Goog, you can find a variety of benefits that they're finding with meditation and mindfulness. Sleep, improved sleep, reduced stress, reduced anxiety, Improvement with blood flow. So if you have any blood pressure issues or things like that, they're starting to find that. Part of the reasoning for that is there is a difference between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, and they're starting to show the difference between that fight or flight system, if any of you have heard of that before, the fight or flight system versus the rest and digest system. So the fight or flight system, which is that system, that autonomic nervous system within us, which will freeze up in a time such as COVID, which will freeze up or will want to fight back. The meditation and mindfulness exercises, what neuroscience is starting to point to is that it puts us into more of that rest and digest autonomic nervous system that we all have access to. That's the rest, that's the ease with which we meet our days. And any kind of tool that we have access to as leaders during this time to connect us into that space is really, really beneficial, especially with all of the upregulation that is going on right now. So let's get into a little exercise. We're just going to sit and breathe for about 2 to 3 minutes, and I'm going to lead you through a very, very simple exercise. And I would invite you to join me. So the first thing that you can do is find your sit bones in your chair, wherever you're sitting. My recommendation, if you have the ability to, is to put your feet flat on the floor. Don't cross your legs. Knees hip distance apart if you can. And if you are sitting on the floor, sitting on your bed or anything like that, whatever's comfortable for you. Don't feel like you have to go to great lengths to try to change anything. Whatever you're doing is just fine. But if you have the ability, knees hip distance apart, sit bones in the chair. Hands, you can do a variety of things with your hands. You can cross them one in front of the other and put them in your lap. You can also put your hands straight down right on your thighs. If that works better, you might notice that changes your shoulders slightly. And once we're in that position, you can choose to either close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or the other option you have is to just very simply look straight in front of you, just kind of slightly down from the nose towards the ground. The concept is we don't want our eyes flitting back and forth. We want them to stay stable and steady. And once you're in that position, you can just slowly close your eyes or look off in the distance, your choice. And we just find our breath. In breath. Out breath. In breath. Out breath. There's no such thing as wrong breathing. So no matter what is going on, we don't have to try to force the breath. We don't have to do anything with it. We can just find it. Wherever it is in our body, if it's in the upper part of our chest, maybe it finds its way to our belly. Whatever our breath is doing is just perfectly fine. In and out. In and out. We have these anchors that we have access to when we're sitting and we're breathing. We look for these anchors, these feet on the floor, grounded, sit bones in the chair, grounded, breath, filling our lungs, in and out, in and out. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes, slowly wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, and welcome back. So that's a very, very simple breathing exercise that really gathers us into this moment. There's a lot of benefits associated with that, as I mentioned before. Neuroscience is showing so much actual changing with the brain when you consistently practice meditation or mindfulness over time. They're kind of calling it exercising, if you will, for the brain. And it supports us with things like emotional and cognitive control, clarity of thought, creativity. All of these things are starting to arise from that space. So as leaders during this time, it becomes really important for us to be able to access that place within us that lets all the other noise just wash over us. And that point of strength, that point of inner strength, however we choose to access it, is what's going to get us through the difficult moments. We can talk about strategy all we want. We can talk about tactile work all we want. But as leaders, what we bring, when we bring ourselves to that moment, that's what changes the moment. The best part of ourselves, that depth with which we can bring ourselves into that moment, that's going to change the outcome. So, yes, Heather, did you have a question?
Yeah, there are two questions, Woodrie, before you advance to the next question. The first one is, can you recommend any online meditation apps, tools or apps? And then the follow-up question to that is, how many times should one be doing sort of that grounding oneself or deep breathing exercises throughout the day? You know, is there a magic number? So those are your two questions. Advance to the next one.
Great, thanks, Heather. Thanks, Heather. So two questions to answer the first one. So there's no maximum amount of hours. Actually, I guess that's the second question. So there's no maximum amount of time that you can really gather yourself from a breath perspective. It's really more of what feels right to you. I'll use it if I'm really stressed out, if my daughter's pulling me and the phone is ringing and I'm trying to do a bazillion things. I'll say, oh my gosh, I really need to take a moment. I'll do it if I know I'm about to go into a really difficult conference call. I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations, and we talk about a lot of providers working with trauma patients or things along those lines. So if you know you're about to go into a really conflict-oriented situation or a very difficult moment, that's a wonderful time to use that breath exercise. And you'll notice it doesn't take much. It really doesn't take much. It's the consistency over time. I open my day with it. I do it every morning and I do it every night. And I'll sprinkle it throughout my day. I think that that's the most powerful thing that we can do as leaders, is sprinkled throughout the day. Find times that work for you. Yeah, that would be my recommendation. Great question, thank you. And the other question is what kind of apps that we can use. Absolutely recommended. Headspace is one. Headspace is a great application. And another one is called Calm. So those are two really good apps that you can utilize and support that. The other thing that I highly recommend for folks in mindfulness and meditation is mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. It was actually developed by John Kabat-Zinn. If you have any questions, you can always email me, or you can find my company with the integration group. Heather can put you in touch with me. I have a document that we can send out associated with meditation mindfulness if that's interesting to you as well. So, yeah. Okay, so fear of the unknown. So give me 1 minute here. Yeah, so fear of the unknown. How do we step into that space, right? So this gets back to those two aspects that I was starting off the conversation with. Connection to self, right? The connection, that ability to connect in, whatever that is, right? That connection tool. And then that reflection tool, right? That second part. So these work in tandem. When we start to connect into our moments on a real regular basis, we start to recognize this underlying sense of energy and this underlying sense of ease with which we can meet our moment. It does not mean that the moment is great. It does not mean that the moment doesn't have challenge. But what it does mean is that when we consistently provide this access to ourselves over time, combined with good self-care, good strong work boundaries, good strong priorities. So you have kind of the non-structured piece, if you will, the inner workings of that self-care component, the connection to self, and then you have that structure piece of what this really looks like within the workplace and what this really looks like when we meet our moment and the challenge of our moment, and that kind of comes into that reflection piece. So when those start to work in tandem, when we have really, really good centering of self, combined with a really, really good, strong, stable way of looking and seeing our real clear reality, that's where we have real power. That's where our power arises from. So what ends up happening is we start to build this depth of trust within ourselves. We start to build this real deep recognition that no matter what the moment brings, we can face it. And if you look at any of the really great resilient leaders, as I mentioned before, I've been talking about resilience for a few years. And if you look and you study at individuals who were faced with really, really challenging times, or you look at individuals who are renowned for their work in this space, Nelson Mandela, right? Martin Luther King, Gandhi, any of these great, extremely resilient individuals who have led movements behind them. What you see is this real staunch strength when they come up against challenge. And it keeps coming and it keeps coming, but they're right there. They're meeting it head on every single time. And part of that comes from that internal connection ability, right? It all stems from that space, combined with a real recognition of an ability to see reality. There's this great book out here, actually, I have it with me. I don't know if this will come up properly, but I highly recommend this. It's called Resilience. It's not about bouncing back. It's probably one of the better books that I found on organizational resilience. It's written by Jennifer Eggers and Cynthia Barlow. And they talk a lot about how one of the aspects of resilience is this concept of staunch acceptance. Resilient leaders have this ability to not shirk from the moment. They have this ability to meet it because they're steady in themselves and they trust that no matter what this moment is going to bring, they're going to be able to meet it head on. So when we're dealing with the unknown, it's that connection back to ourselves, that consistency applied over time that helps us meet that unknown, so that we can face ourselves and we can face all of our community members and we can see, what is this moment requiring of me? Can I see clearly enough to see how can I support myself and all of those around me? What is this need of the moment? And the moment changes. There's no real way for us to know, even in the best of times, right? All the things we take for granted, all of those things, right? In an instant, we realize that it wasn't always so stable. We think it is, but the reality is we're always stepping into the unknown. Whether or not we really see that, it depends on our moments, right? We're given an opportunity right now for many of us, we are really, really struggling with physical security, right? We're seeking that stability. And in times where we are really, really dealing with challenges associated with physical security, am I well? Are my family members well? Are my loved ones well? There's no easy answers. There's no easy answers. Yes.
Hi, Woodrie again. So you were talking about how some of the, just the most infamous leaders and addressing the unknown with this staunch confidence, I think are the words that you used. What about for us everyday folks, right? That maybe perhaps, if you're thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, our foundation is unpredictable at this time, as you were saying, our health or our financial well-being or those things. Or what if a leader is just struggling with confidence, for any other reason, not just COVID related? Does he or she lead with vision and lead with, that resilience when confidence behind the scenes is a tad bit shaky?
Great question. Yeah, thank you. What I would say is two things. One, continue to come back to self in whatever format that works for you, right? If it's a meditation or mindfulness tool, that's great. If it's exercise, that's great. Whatever tool allows you to support yourself. Whatever tool builds your self-care is a step towards confidence. Every time we tend to ourselves, we're caring for ourselves at a very root level. It's building our confidence in ourselves because we're going to be building our reserves to meet that moment. So that's one thing. And the second thing that I would recommend is really to seek support. Find individuals, find your tribe, find those folks that help build you up. When we're lacking confidence, when we need support in those times, it's important to surround ourselves with people who are positive, who are connected, and who really have our best interests at heart. And I find during times like this, especially with COVID, but other times as well, finding those folks who are really going to help you see yourself in a different realm, in a different light, can be really beneficial.
Huh, interesting. I know that, and this isn't a question from the audience, this is a question from, or an observation, mind you, from me. But during this time, over the last month, I'm amazed at how many of our colleagues, whether they're clients or B2B partners like yourself, or, or neighbors that are discovering things like meditation and yoga and mindfulness and all of that, certainly the times call for it. But one last question before wrap it up with housekeeping. If a leader is new to all of this, brand spanking new, the idea of breathing throughout the day or finding, his or her inner strength throughout the day is a foreign concept. What is the baby step, the one little baby step that you think might get them closer to better or more sustainable resilience?
Yeah, I think the biggest baby step is self-care, hands down, self-care. And the reason why I say that is it's something that we oftentimes put on the back burner, and self-care is the root of all resilience. Self-care and connection. And in order to connect in with other people, we first need to connect into ourselves. So when we take really good care of ourselves, we're automatically building our reserves to meet whatever we have to in the moment.
Interesting. All right. So no potato chips for me. Is that what you're saying?
Well, potato chips can sometimes be self-care, right? It gets really tricky, but
the whole bag from Costco, probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Woodrie, I thank you very much for your time and your talent today. Your insight is just so unlike mine. So it's refreshing to hear you. And I am one of those leaders that, the idea of breathing or self-care, something like that, were just foreign concepts to me. And I know I'm not alone. So I appreciate the 30 minutes that you've given us today. So if you're joining us live, I'll just wrap up with a couple of housekeeping things before I let Woodrie say her goodbyes. You can visit thestrivegroup.com for a playback of this, or if you want to share it with a colleague that you think might find it beneficial, please do. Again, that's at thestrivegroup.com. If you have any suggestions for future topics, or if you see something in our programming and you have a specific question you'd like that subject matter expert to address, you can send that question off to me at info@thestrivegroup.com. I'll make sure that the subject matter expert gets that question, or I will look for a subject matter expert to tackle your topic. I'd encourage everybody to strive for positivity. And I know a lot of people give me a lot of guff about that word positivity, but the Strive Group's tagline is aggregating innovative positivity. 3 really, really, really deep words. And I'd encourage you all to think about what that means, aggregating innovative positivity. And certainly with the information that Woodrie has given us here this morning, maybe you can find a little bit of confidence, a little bit of self-care, a little bit of vision and hope and courage to face, these very unsettling times. So I wish you all the best. Have a great weekend. Keep safe, keep your distance, wash your hands, all of that. And then I'll just leave this slide up. Woodrie, you can feel free to talk a little bit about your services and bid everybody farewell, and I'll go ahead and log off.
Thanks, Heather. Thanks everyone for joining. Really, really appreciate your time. Totally happy to be here with you. So my services, I do a variety of things. I offer a lot of strategic consulting to organizations, workshops, events, things along those lines, as well as executive coaching. And I do a lot of national speaking on resilience, boundary setting in the workplace, and a lot of self-care. So thank you for your time. Take care. Bye-bye.